Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for the second episode in the DIY general maintenance playlist. In this episode, like I talked about, we will be doing the fuel filter in this car. Currently has 125,000 miles on it, and from the looks of things, the fuel filter is original to the car, or it may have been swapped out once. So either way, it's definitely due. So here's how it goes. When you buy your replacement fuel filter for your car, it'll come in a box similar to this. Obviously, it'll be different depending on the car and the brand of the filter. But for this car, this is what we're dealing with. And this is the fuel filter itself. One end of the filter is for fuel going in, and obviously the other end is for the fuel coming out. That's really the only part of this job that you can mess up. You just got to make sure that you're paying attention to the flow arrow. Make sure that the fuel coming in from the tank goes in the correct side, and then the fuel going to the motor goes out the correct side as well. One thing that'll make this job a little bit easier for you and a little less messy is to pull the fuel pump fuse. You can find that either in your owner's manual, should be able to tell you what fuse it is, or if you look at your fuse box itself, all your fuses should be labeled. So pull that fuse, start the motor. It'll probably run shortly, probably between 2 seconds and 30 seconds until it uses all the fuel that it can gather out of the lines, and then the engine will die. That way when you take the lines off your fuel filter, you won't have as much fuel pressure and you won't have gas going everywhere. For this project, in this car, the only tools I need are a 5/8 open-end wrench, a ratchet with a 10mm socket, something to catch the little bit of fuel in, and I like to use a small piece of wood, or you can use anything smaller to keep the lines from bending when you're torquing them, trying to get them out of the fuel filter. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. When you're doing this project, you're going to want to jack up the car, find out where your fuel filter is. Usually it's on the side of your fuel tank, or if you follow the lines leaving your fuel tank, it'll be along there somewhere. On this car, you can see I have the car up on the ramps, but I had to jack it up a little bit higher. And as always, when you're working underneath the car, make sure you use jack stands, just in case your jack fails. Alright, so we're here underneath the car. What you're looking at now is the fuel tank. The lines come out of the fuel tank, comes over into the fuel filter. Yes, those lines are rusty. I will plan on changing them out soon. But here is your fuel filter. You can see that the one line coming in from the tank goes through the filter, and it exits to go to the motor. And then you have the one 10mm bolt that holds it in. Now, I talked about using the piece of wood to keep the lines from bending when you're torquing them out. So I've already broken these lines free, but you would want to put your piece of wood in here just to keep the lines from flexing and bending when you're putting torque on them. Like I said, I already loosened these lines a little bit. I already broke them loose. So we're going to remove them from the fuel filter now. And that's why you always have something to catch the fuel. Safety glasses wouldn't hurt either. Now that the lines are disconnected, we will remove the bolt that secures the bracket as we get dripped on with fuel. Yeah, just be prepared to get fuel everywhere. All I did was loosen the bolt holding that fuel line to the bracket so that we can push the fuel filter out. It should come out without too much difficulty. Still not done draining. Well, it's one way to clean your hands, get them covered in fuel, but I don't recommend that. So there we go, fuel filter's out, and the new one goes in just the opposite of how that one came out. So now here we are, we're going to put the fuel filter back in. As you can see, the threads on the lines where they weren't in the old fuel filter are kind of rusted. Normally I would say definitely clean those up with either sandpaper or a wire wheel, but be careful using a wire wheel because if you make a spark, it'd be real easy to ignite that fuel and then you'd have a real big problem on your hands. So like I said, I'm going to be replacing this line eventually anyway, so we're just going to throw the fuel filter back in for now. So make sure you're paying attention to the arrow for the fuel flow. Make sure it's positioned the same way as the old one. And we're just gonna push it right back into place. And we're gonna bend the bracket back to where it needs to be, since we bent it to get the filter out. So we got the fuel filter back in, we got the bolt tightened down, and we got the lines hand tight. Now we are going to tighten them down with the wrench to finish this up. If we can get in there. So those lines are tight. So now that all the work underneath the car is done, we had to put the fuse back in for the fuel pump, and now we need to get fuel back in the lines. The easiest way to do that is quite easy. What you're going to do is cycle the key a few times, put the key in, turn it to run. You should hear the fuel pump kick on. In most newer cars, you probably won't hear the fuel pump, but leave it in run, leave the key in the run position for a few seconds. If your car has push to start, just do the same functions that you would usually do, but keep your foot off the brake. I think it's, for most cars, it's push the start button twice, once for accessory, once for run, and then turn it off. And then repeat that process, like I said, 2 or 3 times. a little demonstration of that. You put the key in. I don't know if you can hear that, but that was the fuel pump running. So we're going to leave it an accessory, turn it back off, turn it to run again. I didn't hear the fuel pump that time. Turn it back off. I'll let it sit for a second. I'm sure you heard the fuel pump that time. And we'll turn it back off. Let it sit for a second, see if we can get it to go a third time. So that was the fuel pump kicking on. We'll look under the car and make sure nothing is leaking. And it looks like we're all right. So here you're going to see the first attempt to start the car after we primed it with the new fuel filter. So here goes. Started right up. Well folks, that's how you change the fuel filter on your car, specifically for the Pontiac Fiero. But the idea is still the same. It should translate to most other cars. If you have any tips, tricks, comments, or ideas of how I could improve this video, as always, make sure you leave them down below. And if you liked what you saw here, please hit the like button. It helps out more than you probably realize. If you want to see more content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, remember you can always DIY.